The marble corridors of ancient Rome once echoed with triumph, ambition, and the voices of men who believed themselves gods. Yet behind those golden facades, behind the chants of victory and the glow of eternal torches, lurked whispers, dark, unspoken, and terrifying. Among those whispers, one name rises again and again, carried through centuries like a curse: Tiberius, the emperor whose reign turned paradise into dread, whose secrets would forever stain the legacy of Rome. They called him the reluctant ruler, the soldier who never sought the throne, yet became one of the most feared men in history. His story begins not on the throne of power, but in the cold shadow of others' ambitions. Born in 42 BCE, Tiberius Claudius Nero came into a world already cracked by civil war. His mother, Livia Drusilla, was brilliant, beautiful, and ruthlessly ambitious. When she married Octavian, the man who would become Emperor Augustus, Tiberius became entangled in a web of politics deeper than any battlefield he would ever face. From childhood, he learned that in Rome, affection was a performance and loyalty a mask. Every smile in the imperial court hid a dagger. Every friend was a potential betrayer. While other children played, Tiberius studied the art of control, his face a calm marble mask, even when rage or sorrow burned behind it. He grew into a man of iron discipline, a commander whose soldiers admired his mind but feared his silence. And yet, that silence hid more than strategy. It hid resentment, it hid longing, it hid the slow corrosion of a soul caught between power and humiliation. When Augustus forced him to marry his own daughter, Julia, Tiberius's life turned into a play he could no longer endure. Julia, famous for her scandalous affairs, mocked him openly. The marriage was loveless, a political transaction dressed as unity. Behind palace walls, Tiberius's humiliation deepened until it became unbearable. So, in a move that stunned the empire, he walked away. In 6 BCE, the man destined to rule Rome exiled himself to the island of Rhodes, a voluntary disappearance no one could quite explain. To the Senate, he gave polite excuses of fatigue. To Augustus, he promised loyalty from afar, but to himself, he gave silence. On that distant island, far from the roar of Rome, Tiberius withdrew into solitude. For years, he lived apart, watching the empire's politics unfold without him. Some said he was meditating, others whispered that he was plotting, but those who knew him saw something else: a man turning inward, hardening, growing cold. Perhaps it was there, on Rhodes, that the seeds of his later darkness took root. Isolation changes people. It strips away their masks and forces them to face what lies beneath. For Tiberius, what lay beneath was bitterness. Bitterness that he would never be loved for who he was. Bitterness that the empire admired his victories but despised his person. And perhaps worst of all, bitterness that he had given his life to serve a family that never truly wanted him. When Augustus's favored heirs, Gaius and Lucius, died unexpectedly, fate twisted cruelly back toward Tiberius. The old emperor had no choice but to name him successor. It was not affection that brought Tiberius home. It was necessity. Rome had no one else. In 14 CE, when Augustus breathed his last, Tiberius ascended the throne. Outwardly, he was the image of control, calm, formal, even reluctant. The Senate praised his restraint. The people saw in him a soldier king who might restore Roman virtue. But those who looked closer noticed the cracks forming beneath the marble facade. He distrusted everyone: friends, senators, generals, even his own family. Where Augustus had ruled with charm and spectacle, Tiberius ruled with suspicion and silence. The Senate learned to fear his letters more than his presence. A simple word from the emperor could mean exile, disgrace, or death. Still, Rome was willing to tolerate his severity, for he brought order and discipline. But with every passing year, the emperor's distrust grew darker. His praetorian prefect, Sejanus, became his shadow, his eyes, his enforcer, his instrument of fear. Together, they turned Rome into a city of whispers. Accusations of treason spread like plague. Trials filled the forums. Neighbors spied on neighbors. Yet, even as he crushed conspiracies, something inside Tiberius was unraveling. The more he controlled others, the less he could control himself. His paranoia grew into a constant storm. He began to see enemies everywhere, plots where none existed, betrayal in every act of kindness. And then, in 26 CE, without warning, Tiberius vanished again. He left Rome behind, retreating to the island of Capri, a jewel of cliffs and turquoise waters off the Italian coast. Officially, he claimed he was tired of politics. Unofficially, Rome held its breath. For nearly a decade, the emperor would never again set foot in the capital. Capri became his fortress, his world, and, according to history, his prison of shadows. At first, the Senate tried to believe the best. They told themselves the emperor was simply managing affairs from afar. After all, his letters continued to arrive, calm, precise, and deliberate. But the tone of those letters grew stranger over time. They became colder, detached, even erratic. Some contained strange demands. Others carried veiled threats. And slowly, Rome realized that something on Capri had changed their emperor. Visitors to the island spoke in hushed tones when they returned. They described villas of impossible beauty, terraced gardens, marble baths, fountains that glimmered in torchlight. Yet something in their voices betrayed unease. It wasn't the architecture that haunted them, it was the atmosphere. The silence felt heavier there, they said, as though the island itself was holding its breath. At night, distant sounds echoed from the cliffs. Laughter that didn't sound joyful, cries that weren't quite human. The locals began to avoid the emperor's walls after sunset. Fishermen who sailed too close to the shore swore they saw strange shapes in the torchlight, shadows moving along the parapets long after the emperor's court had gone to sleep. No one dared ask what truly happened inside those marble walls. But the rumors began. They spoke of feasts that felt more like rituals, of games that blurred the line between entertainment and cruelty, of an emperor whose mind was slipping further into the dark. The Senate pretended not to hear. Who would dare accuse the emperor? Who would dare investigate? To question him was to risk everything. So Rome turned away, letting the island drift into legend. Behind the walls of Capri, Tiberius's isolation had deepened. He surrounded himself with a small circle of attendants, men chosen not for their loyalty, but for their obedience. Every day grew quieter, every night stranger. The man who once commanded armies now commanded shadows, and yet it is in this silence that his legend grew monstrous. Ancient historians, Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, wrote later that Capri became a place of unspeakable corruption. a world where the emperor's desires and fears twisted into something unrecognizable. Their accounts may have been exaggerated by disgust or political revenge, but one thing remains certain. Even Rome, accustomed to cruelty, recoiled at the rumors that drifted across the sea. The truth of what happened there may never be fully known. Some say Tiberius, tormented by age and guilt, descended into madness. Others claim he turned Capri into a reflection of Rome's own hypocrisy, a mirror showing the empire its moral decay. Whatever the truth, Capri became more than a retreat. It became a symbol, a warning of what happens when absolute power isolates a man completely from humanity. By the late 20s CE, Rome was changing. Sejanus, the emperor's prefect, ruled the capital in his absence, consolidating power and spreading terror in Tiberius's name. Executions multiplied. The Senate bowed lower than ever. Every act of cruelty, every whisper of fear led back to Capri. And still, no one dared speak the emperor's name above a whisper. It was during these years that Tiberius's paranoia reached its peak. He sent letters filled with suspicion, accusing senators of plots, condemning men he had never met. He no longer trusted Sejanus, his closest ally, and soon even that bond turned to ash. The purge that followed was swift and merciless. Sejanus was executed, his family erased, his allies hunted down one by one. But the victory brought Tiberius no peace. The man who had once ruled the world's greatest empire now ruled only himself, and even that rule was slipping. Some say he spent his last years wandering the marble halls of his villa, speaking to the shadows as though they answered him back. Others claim he gazed endlessly at the sea, seeing ghosts in the waves. Whatever he saw on that island, it consumed him. The letters that continued to reach Rome grew fewer, shorter, and colder. Eventually, even they stopped. Capri had swallowed its emperor whole, and so the whispers grew darker. What had truly happened on that island? What had isolation done to the mind of the most powerful man in the world? Was Tiberius the monster Rome claimed he was, or the mirror of the empire itself, reflecting its corruption back upon it? Before we uncover the truth behind those chilling rumors, take a moment to join our growing circle of truth seekers. History hides its darkest stories, not because they're forgotten, but because they reveal too much about us. So, if you believe these stories should be told, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and help us unearth the shadows history tried to bury. Because the deeper we look into Rome's past, the more we begin to see ourselves in its reflection. The sun rarely touched the peaks of Capri. Storms gathered, not of rain, but of whispers. Servants who entered Tiberius's villa learned quickly that silence was the only form of survival. Their eyes were always downcast, their lips sealed tighter than the imperial vaults. Those who served him said the emperor's voice had changed, lower, rougher, heavy with sleepless nights and unspoken guilt. His laughter, once rare but warm, now echoed through the marble halls like a blade scraping stone. Rome still called him Princeps, first citizen, but on Capri, he was a ghost ruling from the edge of the world. Each morning, the emperor would stand upon the cliffs. The sea below churned violently, its waves slamming against jagged rocks. He often stared into the horizon for hours, muttering to himself as if negotiating with something only he could see. A handful of guards remained loyal or too afraid to flee. One of them, a veteran named Cassian, later wrote that Tiberius had begun keeping scrolls filled with names, not of enemies, but of those he feared might one day speak against him. It was said that his paranoia became his closest advisor. Even the marble statues in his court were not safe. He ordered their faces chipped away, their eyes gouged out. No stone, he once murmured, should dare to watch me. It was as though he was fighting an invisible trial, judged not by men, but by memories. Back in Rome, his absence created a vacuum. The Senate whispered of his madness. The people mocked the name Capri, turning it into a curse. Letters were intercepted. Rumors multiplied. Each rumor was worse than the last, that the emperor had turned his villa into a temple of fear, that even the winds around the island refused to speak his name aloud. But no one dared confront him. His network of spies reached every street corner, every senator's table, every whisper of dissent. Power, once built on conquest, was now maintained through shadows. Then came the night the emperor ordered the musicians to play. After years of silence, he suddenly wanted music. Something that remembers Rome, he said. The instruments filled the villa with trembling notes of lyres and flutes. But halfway through the song, Tiberius raised his hand. Stop, he commanded. He looked at the musicians, their faces pale in torchlight, and whispered, I hear another tune beneath yours. Do you hear it too? They shook their heads. The emperor smiled faintly, almost tenderly. It's the sea, he said. It's calling for something I still owe. From that night on, he refused to sleep indoors. His servants built a platform near the cliff where he would sit through the night, wrapped in imperial robes, staring into the dark waves. Some said he was haunted by the ghosts of those he condemned. Others believed he was simply listening for forgiveness in the voice of the wind. When news of his failing health reached Rome, few believed it. Tiberius had survived rebellions, storms, and betrayals. Surely he would survive old age. But one morning, his physician found him silent, eyes open, facing the sea. No one knew his final words, but those who prepared his body claimed his lips were curved in a faint, knowing smile, as if the emperor had finally heard the answer he'd been waiting for. In Rome, the Senate pretended to mourn, yet behind closed doors, they celebrated quietly. The monster of Capri was gone, and with him, an era of fear. But history, as always, refused to forget. Even now, centuries later, the island of Capri remains beautiful and eerily still. Locals say that on windless nights, you can hear faint echoes rising from the cliffs. Some call it the sea. Others say it's the whisper of an emperor who ruled too long in the dark, still trying to make peace with his own shadows.